Welcome to Leading Edge. I'm Tim Miller in this week for Jerry Anderson. So glad you are joining us. Are you ready to get out and vote in August? We have a very different situation coming up in Ohio as we have a second primary election on August 2nd, and we want to know more about this and how it's going to all play out. So joining me today is Sam Nelson. He is Associate Professor of Political Science for the University of Toledo. Sam, always great to talk to you. We know that the reason we're having the second primary is because of this redistricting map in Ohio. Our lawmakers weren't able to reach a deal on what it should look like. So now we have to have this second primary for things like the state Senate and state House races and Central Committee. How do you think this is going to play out? Is it going to be too chaotic for voters to figure out?
Well, I think it's going to be really confusing for a lot of voters. They may not even realize that the primary is happening because the big ticket races like U.S. Senate and House, the ones that get a lot of attention, a lot of television advertising, a lot of mailers, those aren't on the ballot this time. We've already voted in those primaries. And, it's not like you see a lot of TV ads for a state House race or get a lot of attention. So that's one thing. It's just lower profile. It's not a time of year when we're used to voting in primaries. Primary turnout's already low. And for a lot of people, it's going to be confusing because of the redistricting. They may be in a different district today than they were a year ago, and they may not even recognize the names on the ballot because they're now looking at a whole different group of politicians than what they had been accustomed to.
So this is by far an ideal situation for voters and for these candidates who are trying to win a race.
Right. And I mean, it adds a certain unpredictability, and it means that some odd things might happen or unexpected things might happen in some of these races. Some of the races aren't contested, so it's not as big a deal, but it certainly scrambles the math a little bit, and I think it makes it a lot harder for voters to get the information they need or want in order to participate in this primary.
Talking with Sam Nelson from the University of Toledo. Sam, who does it benefit if turnout is poor for this August 2nd primary? Is it best for the incumbent who maybe has that name recognition?
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think name recognition is key in the state legislative races. Low turnout is going to probably benefit Republicans because their voters are older and more likely to turn out. Democratic voters tend to be younger, more occasional voters. I mean, we see this in midterms and in primaries.
And with the latest news is that the Ohio Supreme Court has yet again rejected the redistricting maps, basically saying it's unconstitutional. How do you see this ending? What is the end game? Will we ever reach a compromise, or will this just go on without a really good and constitutional map?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. We're going to be voting in November on unconstitutional maps, according to the state Supreme Court. People are going to lose races that they might have won on different maps. People are going to win races that they might not have won. And it's kind of, well, I don't know. I'm a good government type. It's kind of irritating, to be honest, because what we're going to see is after the election, this is going to be continued to be litigated. And in all likelihood, in 2024, when we vote again, we will be voting in different districts or on a different map than we are this year. And of course, the idea is that you're supposed to do this every 10 years and have stable districts and so on. And we're going to change now, and then we're going to change again, possibly in 2024. The federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court may get involved because, of course, there are redistricting cases coming up in other states as well. And so it's kind of a chaotic thing, and it makes it very difficult for candidates to plan campaigns when we had all this uncertainty.
Right. I can only imagine how hard that is to campaign. Maybe you don't even know what your district is or who your voters are.
Right.
Turning our attention now, Sam, once again, Sam Nelson from the University of Toledo talking politics with us here on Leading Edge. We have the midterm elections coming up. Normally, that is not good for the party that has the president in the White House. How do you see things for Democrats? We know in the middle of inflation, do you foresee a tough time for Democrats trying to run here in these midterm elections?
It does seem like it's going to be a tough environment, right? Like you say, inflation is there, and people notice that, right? We had a lot of press coverage of gas prices going up and no coverage of gas prices going back down. So that's on people's minds. It is always historically tough. in midterms. But, you could look at the example of 1998, Bill Clinton, second term. You would expect that to have been a Republican wave election. And they really got damaged by their impeachment of Bill Clinton. They were seen as extreme, and it cost them a lot of races they could have won. That dynamic could play out here. In close races, candidate quality matters. And if you look at the U.S. Senate races, you've got some, I want to be nice, but some pretty low quality Senate candidates in a couple of states for Republicans. That could cost them races that they could have won with better candidates. Abortion is going to play a huge role in the midterms. If that wasn't on the table, if the case hadn't just come down, if abortion wasn't one of the issues in November, I think that would have been worse news for Democrats. I think abortion being there is likely to energize Democratic voters who might otherwise not have turned out. So this is a very unpredictable midterm in a lot of ways. But, if I was putting money on it, which I don't, because that would be, bad for political scientists. But, I'd say, Democrats are going to have a hard time, but there is a lot going on. And of course, we don't know what inflation numbers will be in September and October. And those are the ones that are going to matter, probably.
And Sam, we know that President Biden is suffering from some low approval ratings. A recent Reuters Ipsos poll from this week said 59% of Americans disapprove of his job performance. How does that affect the rest of his presidency going on? Obviously, inflation has a big deal to do with that.
There's that. There was, Afghanistan withdrawal ended up not being popular, but that's a tough position to be in. A lot of that disapproval may be people who were Biden voters who are disappointed in the failure of some of the agenda to be passed because of Joe Manchin blocking everything in the Senate. Every time they think they've got a deal, they block. That's very demoralizing for Democrats and for independents who lean towards Democrats. That doesn't mean those people won't vote for Democrats in the midterms, but it does mean that they're less likely to turn out. I think that kind of that pall of discontent is the kind of thing that keeps people at home during a midterm election.
And we're hearing a lot, Sam, lately about Donald Trump maybe announcing soon that he'll run again in 2024. Do you think that announcement is coming? And what does that do to the race? Does President Biden face off against him in 2 years? And what a circus that would be.
Yeah, I mean, anything that involves Trump is going to be a circus, right? And, the timing is interesting. I read that a lot of Republican elected officials would really rather he didn't get in the race before the midterms because they would like to run a bunch of individual Senate and House campaigns based on, disapproval with Biden. You bring Trump into the picture in, say, September, which is the rumor that when he might announce, and now the midterms are about Trump. And that's not where I think a lot of Republican office holders want to be because that's going to energize Democrats, right? If you highlight, there are a whole bunch of Republican candidates who are election deniers, right? Who say that Joe Biden didn't win the election. That issue kind of simmers down if Trump is not visible during the campaign. But if Trump is visible during the campaign, that Democratic anger against those folks, that's going to be very energizing. And then you start to forget about things like, well, I didn't get the things from Biden that I was hoping for.
Right.
Now you're focused on, I got to keep Trump out.
It is going to be fascinating. So thank you so much. Sam Nelson from the University of Toledo joining us here on Leading Edge. Can't wait to see how things turn out, even if it's a headache for voters. And coming up here on Leading Edge, it's the 100th deadliest days for teen drivers. We'll hear from a safety expert. Stay with us. And we are back here on Leading Edge. They are calling this the 100 deadliest days for teenagers. And for the father of two teens, one who is driving, this is kind of a scary time because these are the moments, these are the days where stats show it's a higher chance for teenagers to be hurt or killed in car accidents. And joining me this morning is one of our safety experts that we like to go to a lot, Gina Vera. She's supervisor, injury prevention and community outreach for ProMedica Russell Ebi Children's Hospital. She's also the driving force behind Safe Kids of Greater Toledo. Gina, thanks for joining us here on Leading Edge. We know we're kind of in the middle of this 100 deadliest days. It starts on Memorial Day, goes to Labor Day. How do you think things are going? We don't want teens to forget about this as the summer goes on, do we?
No, we don't. We want to make sure that teens are safe on the road as well as everyone else. And we do see statistically that there's an increase in the number of injuries and deaths for teenage drivers during the summer. And so we want to make sure that they are aware of some of the things that they can do to keep themselves and others on the road safe.
And the biggest thing that I think of as a teen parent, a parent of a teen, is that distracted driving. We know phones are the big things, but one thing that maybe parents don't think about a lot is just having other friends, other teens in the car. I've even read that that's the number one distraction for teen drivers.
It is definitely when a teenager has three other teenagers in the vehicle with them, their chance of getting into a crash and having some fatalities quadruples. So it really is a huge impact on how these outcomes are. When a teenager is in their probationary period of their driving, they are only allowed one non-family member allowed in the vehicle with them. And a lot of times parents don't even understand the laws, and the teens certainly don't, and they just want to be there with their friends. And so when they are driving along with all of the friends, they can definitely distract each other. And the other thing that they can do too is kind of entice the driver to take some risky behaviors when they're driving. So we want to make sure that they're not doing that either.
And we're with Gina from Safe Kids Toledo. And Gina, when they do get to the point where they have their license and they've met all those other restrictions, how many can they have in a car, or how many do you think, as a safety expert, they should have as far as teenagers in a car?
Well, really, the safest would be no other teen passengers in the vehicle, but by law here in Ohio, they can have up to one non-family member. So when those other teens are with them, then that's when those injuries and deaths can occur. We actually see that when a parent or a guardian is with them, the chance for those deaths actually decrease. So they're making sure that that teen is not taking those risky behaviors.
And we're talking once again about the 100 deadliest days for teen drivers. This is right in the middle of it here in the middle of the summer. But Gina, there's a role that parents play too, right? And I always think, if I'm on my phone, if I'm using it, if I'm sending a text, that's sending a message even silently to the kids. Hey, it's okay if mom or dad are doing it. So what role do we as parents have with this?
We play a huge role. I don't think a lot of people realize how big of a role we should be playing for those teen drivers. So even when they're little, when they start facing the front in their car seats, they are watching what we are doing. I hear a lot of times that the kiddos are the ones that are the seatbelt police, making sure that everybody in the vehicle are wearing their seatbelts, but they're also watching to see what that driver is doing. So if they're on their phone, or if they're being distracted, or if they have any road rage, then that's something that they're going to learn that it's okay to do. And then as they become drivers themselves, they may do that as well.
And it's not okay. It's not okay to just say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I don't want you doing that." Because when they're alone or with their friends, they may adopt some of those same behaviors.
Absolutely, yes. So we have to be good role models, show them the correct things to do, so that they know and they feel empowered too. And that's the other thing, is that we can empower everyone else in the vehicle. So even if our teen driver, thinks that it's going to be okay, if we're sharing that with our own teens, because there's going to be times when they're riding with a friend and we may not be able to control what that friend is doing, but your own teen might be able to speak up and, save their life, save somebody else's life, just by saying, hey buddy, this isn't something that you should be doing, or I don't feel safe when you speed or when you're distracted on your phone.
Great safety tips as always. And one last thing, Gina, sometimes you can be the best driver or the best teen driver in the world, but it's the other guy you have to worry about. What's one piece of advice you have for teen drivers when looking out for the other guy?
Just always be very cautious. The inexperience of teen drivers is one of the reasons why they are more susceptible to being in a crash. So we want them to be aware, which is why we say don't be distracted with anything. But take that extra few seconds at the light when it's turned green before you actually go out into, that intersection. Don't be afraid that you're holding somebody up behind you. You just want to make sure that you're being very aware of your surroundings. Nighttime driving is very dangerous for teens, but we also want to make sure that parents give their teens plenty of driving time.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Gina from Safe Kids Toledo, keeping us on the leading edge of safety for our kids during this time. And up next on Leading Edge, it's summertime. You're spending a lot of time out in the sun. The one expert is here to talk about how dangerous that can be. Welcome back to Leading Edge. I'm Tim Miller, once again filling in for Jerry Anderson. We have had a great summer. So many great weather days, chances to get outside and enjoy the sun. But while you're doing that, keep in mind there's also danger out there. Bad sunburns, and even in the worst case scenario, skin cancer. And July is UV Safety Awareness Month, and we wanted to bring in someone to talk more about this and how we can protect ourselves. Dr. David Macari is an oncologist from ProMedica, joining us here on the Leading Edge. Dr. Macari, thanks for being here today. Just wanted to check in with you. Do you think people just aren't getting the message that they need to wear sunscreen, they need to protect themselves? You can't just run outside and have fun in the sun.
Yeah, absolutely. Using UV protection is really the main way of protecting yourself against the long-term damages from the sun. And the worst case scenario, and the thing that nobody wants to come see me about, would be the eventual consequences of skin cancer.
And I imagine, unfortunately, you see cases like that. Even nowadays, when there's so much education out there about sunscreen, you probably still see these patients, unfortunately, and many of them get pretty sick.
Absolutely. Very dear patient of mine, I've been treating for melanoma for quite some time, is particularly in my mind as I am discussing with you. And it just breaks my heart that people end up having incurable disease that could have potentially been prevented by protecting your skin earlier in life.
I've heard, Dr. Macari, that even one bad sunburn as a kid can have long-term effects. Is that hyperbole, or is there some validity to that?
Yeah, the research shows that the main risks for the particularly deadly kinds of skin cancer like melanoma come from severe sunburns. So this high intensity intermittent sun exposure is really the worst kind of exposure to the sun. So one bad sunburn, even one use of a tanning bed, really the history of blistering sunburns, these are the really severe risk factors for melanoma later in life.
Do you think sometimes it's a case of laziness where I just want to get out to the beach, I just want to get out to the pool, or I'm going to a softball game I'm going to be playing in, I don't have time for sunscreen? Is that what happens a lot of times?
Well, I think it's probably a case of being human. We're all excited to get in the sun, and I think oftentimes we underestimate how our skin's going to respond to sun exposure earlier in the summer. So I think most of the time when people get bad sunburns, they're surprised by it. So, I don't judge somebody for having a bad sunburn, but it is really important to be judicious early on in the summer as you're protecting your skin, especially to use a higher SPF. And then throughout the summer to also continue to use UV protecting measures like shirts or staying out of the sun during the peak hours of the day, and definitely continuing to use sunscreen.
Yeah, you were talking a lot about the melanoma and skin cancer. How quickly can this develop? I mean, does it take several times out in the sun? Is it a certain age where you're most vulnerable?
Melanoma is mostly a disease of, the older population. Sorry, older means something different to everybody, but, it's something that's more patients in the later decades of life, 50s, 60s, 70s. And less of a risk of developing melanoma in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, although incidence is increasing in the younger population. But really, the damage that you do to your skin now is going to manifest itself decades later.
And what kind of, what number SPF? We're with Dr. Macari from ProMedica talking about UV Awareness Month here in July and how important it is to protect your skin. What number of SPF do you suggest or do you recommend? Some people use a 20 or a 30. There are times where I've been like, I'm getting older, I'm throwing 50 on or more. there's no need to get a bad sunburn now. What do you recommend?
I definitely recommend, if you are unfamiliar with what your skin needs, to start with an SPF of 50, and you'll be absolutely protected from a sunburn as long as you're reapplying frequently and using a high SPF like 50 or plus.
Is that something too, though, Dr. Macari, that a lot of times we forget? We go in the water, we go in the pool, we go in the water in the beach, and we come back out and forget to put it back on, or we don't want to be bothered.
Yeah, reapplying is just as important as putting it on first.
We know people want to get a tan. So tanning beds are, maybe some of them are safer than others, but you recommend against that?
Any tanning bed use in life increases the risk of potentially deadly melanoma later in life. So I'd recommend against tanning bed use, even for a short period of time, even for a one-time event in your life. It's been shown that there's a correlation in people who develop melanoma, that even one use of tanning beds increases that risk.
All right, good advice there. Well, Dr. David Macari from ProMedica, thank you so much for talking more about UV Awareness Month and how important it is to protect ourselves. We appreciate it. And we will be back here on Leading Edge. Stay with us. My thanks to all our guests here on Leading Edge, keeping us on the leading edge of local politics, safety, and what to do when you are out in the sun and making sure you are protecting your skin. Once again, I'm Tim Miller. Thanks for joining us here on Leading Edge. Have a great day.